Greetings, hi, hello. My name is Nick, and I used to briefly live in this van. This is a 2002 Ford E350 with a 6.8 liter, and it's a pretty basic build. I think we're gonna check it out today. This is my second time living in a vehicle. I briefly lived in a Chevy Suburban a long time ago, and then, I have to admit, I was guilty. I got caught up in the van life trend, and I was like, you know what? I really want to get a van. So I did, and I picked out this Ford E350, and it's really been a great, useful tool to ultimately find a place to settle down. And I lived full-time in this for 6 months, and it was extremely helpful to just be able to cruise around the fine state of Arizona here and find an ultimate place that I wanted to rest my hat. And it was just a useful tool, and it served its purpose, and I had a really, really great time too. If you're looking at building out a van, you gotta just think about the basic needs. It's really easy to just get caught up in wanting a shower and just like subway tiling your whole thing and making like a kitchen and all that. But at the end of the day, there's really only 3 needs. There's a lot of wants, but the needs are food, water, and shelter. The van is definitely the shelter. The food, there's a few different routes you can go. I chose to go with a 12-volt refrigerator run off solar. And if you do some math on this and you plan on doing this pretty long term, it really beats the ice situation, because you're going to constantly be going in to town to get ice, which is definitely a burden, but also there's a cost factor there. And you have to account for food spoilage too. So I think if you're really, really serious about this, a fridge is something that's really beneficial to just make life easier on the food front. And water, you can get really carried away with giant 50-gallon tanks under your rig, but that just adds a lot of weight. I think personally for me, I found the best thing is to just have a few different jerry cans, and you can get as much water as you think you might need for a certain duration of stay in a certain place. I found that to be a pretty effective means to transporting water, and a pretty great way to take care of your food. And the van, well, it's obviously your shelter. Everything else after that is purely a want. And what you're really, really, really gonna want is a comfortable bed. I'm definitely a full-size human. I'm almost 6 feet tall, and this bed is extremely comfortable. I really love it. It's only 6 inches of memory foam, but for whatever reason, this thing is comfy. And I could have put the bed this way, but it just wasn't quite, it was just a little too cramped for me. So sleeping was so important. I don't know, I like it. It's extremely comfortable. Creative table options are, there's some wild ones out there. And I also saw a guy on YouTube that went with the homemade DIY lagoon mount table. It's just done with some, I think it's it might be 1.25 inch pipe, and yeah, it swivels, and it's a great place to just have a desk where you can edit or just go on your computer. You could work if you're working remote. Great place to eat a meal. It's such a functional table, and you can move it outside too. You can just kick the thing out, and bam, you can hang out outside with your table. It does, if it wasn't for the van, this table would do a 360, but it's obviously in a van and does about a 180. It's pretty great. I think this is a piece of mahogany. I got this for sale at Home Depot. It was one of those deals that was like cut in a weird shape and had the purple spray paint on it. And I think it looks pretty nice. It really shimmers in the sun, which is, I don't know, kind of cool, I guess. But I put a little magnet on it to store it. You just go, and that's it. So the indoor table is cool. This table is infinitely cooler because I cook all my meals on this table. I just did a little carabiner setup with some paracord. Hooks up to here, and it's a great table to just do a single burner stove. You could fry up whatever. It's not in the van necessarily, but you can cook on the floor just as easily. But sometimes you're cooking something, kind of wild, like you don't want to cook a fish in your van necessarily unless you have to. So it's nice to get outdoors and just cook something outside. Personally don't eat a lot of fish, but just an example. The doors on these Ford Econolines are also extremely cavernous. There's a lot of thickness there. So I found out actually after the fact that if I took a jigsaw, I could cut out the inside of this door, and you could store a ton of stuff in there, like, stuff that you necessarily don't want to sleep with, like right next to your bed. You could do motor oil or Windex or just all kinds of cleaning stuff. Stuff it in the door, and then the best part about it is put the table down and it disappears like it's not even there. I sound dead in this whole van. I insulated it too. There's 1 inch of polyiso foam in the ceiling, 1 inch on the floor, and there's some foam in the walls, and it does a pretty good job. I think insulation is really important, but I think a lot of people do get really carried away with like vapor barriers and like spending a lot of money on like thinsulate, and you You could make it extremely insulated, but at the end of the day, this really did the job, and I don't really have any complaints about foam insulation. It really served my purpose, and I was pretty happy with it. Something I think is really important to mention is it's just really important to work with what you got. It's so easy to get caught up in all these photos you see on Instagram, and you don't necessarily need to line your whole van with thin slit and do all these things that are, you know, kind of expensive options. And just insulation, for example, it's totally okay to just use the polyiso foam and, you know, just do the best you can. You don't need to get the biggest and best everything to live in a vehicle. And a lot of times you'll find out that maybe something doesn't work for you after the fact. And the longer you live in something, the more little tweaks and changes you can make to customize it to work best for you. And I think that's something that's really, really important to hammer home. I'm running 200 watts of solar on the roof that go into a 40 amp MPPT charge controller, which kind of tracks the sun in a way. It's a little different than a PWM, which is just an on-off switch essentially. So you get to really just juice those 200 watts, because it's not a massive system, but it is enough to run the max air fan, run the fridge, charge pretty much anything you want to charge. And I have a 750 watt inverter that I could plug just your standard household stuff into, like a hair trimmer or just whatever else you may need. I even plugged an angle grinder into it once, and it goes into a 310 amp hour AGM battery bank under the bed. The most recent upgrade, I encountered some snow, and immediately I was like, man, I gotta do something about this. This is just way too cold. So I went with the Chinese diesel heater. I couldn't afford, you know, something like a Webasto or some other makes like that. And it really was a great option. It pumps out a really nice dry heat. Unfortunately, the Arizona sun has completely just eaten away my fuel tank, which I mounted on the outside, but it's still all wired and plumbed, and all I have to do is just throw a fuel tank at it, and this thing's ready to pump out some crispy, hot, dry, fresh, hot air. And yeah, I can't say enough about the diesel heater too. It's such a great option as opposed to propane, which is kind of a wet heat, so I'm told. I'm really not sure. I've never experimented with those, but the diesel heater really worked for me, and I can't really recommend it enough, to be honest. If you're interested in getting more perspective on my view of van life and some of the realities are really harsh, and a lot of them are kind of swept under the rug. I bring it pretty real and pretty raw over on my channel, Captain Narkill. Done a few videos about the pros and the cons. The pros are obvious and obviously extremely overwhelming, but the cons, there are some, and they're almost kind of like secretive, the way some people go about it. That's why I'm a huge fan of Brian's channels. It's just such a real, raw, genuine channel. And this van was ultimately, at the end of the day, just a tool for me to ultimately find a place that I wanted to rest my hat. And I think I found it. We got this manufactured home with a little acreage, and I really love it here, and I just really gel with the area. And thanks to this van, this was something that I was able to attain. And you know, it really hurts to say this, it's kind of tough. I got a lot of sentimental value in this van, and I love it a lot, but at the end of the day, it was an end to a means, and I've decided to sell this van. So if you're interested in possibly buying a pretty functional, basic build out that, you know, runs great and does the job, this van currently is for sale. Feel free to reach out to me at captainnarkill@gmail.com. And yeah, kind of hurts, man, but I think, you know, the time has come to switch it up and do something different. So really appreciate it. Appreciate you checking out my van, and super awesome hanging out with Brian for the last couple of days. Such a cool guy, and yeah, thank you so much.
Beautiful day out here. Bulldog Canyon, Arizona.
Yeah.
You can't beat it.